Rebecca is often described as a gothic romance, a haunting story about love, jealousy, and the haunting figure of a dead woman. But the more I read this book, the more I realized that this story isn't just about ghostly figures or their memories, it's about control and manipulation. Hello, my gorgeous viewers and readers. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. I hope your weekend was filled with warm, comforting foods, long, sunny afternoons, and maybe the slightly unsettling feeling that you're not in control of your own story. Today, I want to talk about Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This book has completely consumed me. I have stayed way too many nights awake just reading one more chapter. This book has hooked me so badly. This book is dark, it's atmospheric, it's deeply psychological, it's gothic in its own best description of the word. But most importantly, if there's one thing that this book is, it's tense. Because from the very beginning, you see that there is something deeply wrong in this book, but not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a way that is so unsettling and so quiet that slowly creeps into you. You start to question everything: people's intentions, people's words, and most importantly, people's silence. And by the time I finished the book, I realized that this isn't just a gothic mystery, it is actually one of the most perfect portrayals of manipulation and psychological torture that I have seen in a very, very long time. As a quick summary, the story follows an unnamed woman, later called Mrs. De Winter, who meets Maxime De Winter, a really wealthy widower, while she works as a companion in Monte Carlo. Their relationship develops really quickly, and before she realizes, she finds herself married to Maxime and moving to Manderley, which is Maxime's grand estate in England. But once she arrives to the grand estate, to Manderley, she realizes that she is not stepping into her new life, but into someone else's. Because Manderley is still deeply haunted by the memory of Maxime's first wife, Rebecca. Everyone speaks about her like she is a miracle. She is the most beautiful creature everyone has ever seen. She is deeply intelligent, she is elegant, she is perfect. And obviously, the new Mrs. De Winter finds herself constantly being compared to her by the staff, by society, by Maxime's friends, but most importantly, by herself. And this tension is multiplied by 10 when we meet Mrs. Danvers, who is the housekeeper of Manderley and also was incredibly fiercely loyal to Rebecca, and obviously treats the new wife with really cold hostility. And the more the story unfolds, the more we see how the new Mrs. De Winter becomes increasingly insecure, jealous, but also psychologically overwhelmed, until we find out the truth about Rebecca, and it's that she wasn't as perfect as she seemed, because she has a really dark and unsettling secret. Now, there are many topics we could discuss from this book because this is truly a masterpiece, right? We could talk for hours about how deeply embedded patriarchy and classism are into British society, more specifically into British high society. But the one thing I want to focus my attention on is the dynamics between the characters, because all these topics that we see in the book are actually related to the dynamics between the characters, more specifically, how people interact with Rebecca. The first thing I noticed is the clear differentiation between Rebecca and Mrs. De Winter, the second wife, right? If we look at the main character as at Mrs. De Winter, we see from the get-go that she is an unknown woman, right? We don't even know her first name. She's so unimportant that this information is not mentioned, right? Not even by herself or by Maxim or by any of the characters that have any sort of relationship with her. She is always considered Mrs. De Winter, right? And this clearly puts her in a position where she cannot be herself. She can only be the shadow of Rebecca, of the former or the late Mrs. De Winter. And this is done on purpose because from the get-go, we see that she is not a fully formed individual, right? She is incredibly young. I think she's around 19 years old. Also, she is not incredibly beautiful. She's not the most beautiful creature someone has ever seen. Also, she is not very intelligent. She is quite uneducated, but also she doesn't have any sort of hobbies or any sort of interests that people within high society in Britain have, right? She doesn't hunt. She is not interested in dog breeding, for example, or she doesn't like sailing. She only likes the things that she likes that are very readily available for everyone, for the main society, right? And that clearly makes a difference between her and the rest of the society that she gets introduced to, right? That is why from the get-go, she is in a losing battle with Rebecca, because they are constantly comparing her and showing how different she is from Rebecca, from the late Mrs. De Winter. What we do know about her is how she sees herself or how she views herself, right? She sees herself as inadequate to enter this high society, but also as lesser than everyone else. And most importantly, she sees herself as lesser than the image that she's constantly trying to portray, or the image that other people put on her, which is the image of Rebecca, right? And also Rebecca represents everything that she isn't, right? Rebecca was confident, she was intelligent, she was incredibly educated, and also she fit right into this British high society. She loved to do all the things that other people do, right? Golfing, hunting, sailing. She fit right into Maxim's life, which is something that the new Mrs. De Winter doesn't, right? Which is what makes her incredibly jealous and even more deeply insecure than she ever was. Because the one thing that she wants more than anything is Maxim's attention and Maxim's love, because he is the only person that has actually shown some sort of interest towards her. And because of this constant comparison and also the unnerving desire of owning Maxim's heart, she becomes ghost-like. She is in the middle of wanting to be the person that she truly is meant to be, which is herself, and is the person that Maxim loves, and also becoming the person that society wants her to be, which is a second Mrs. De Winter or like Rebecca. So because she is in the middle of these two personalities, she becomes overshadowed by the memory of Rebecca and actually is erased by it. Now, this is where things become incredibly interesting for me, because even though we see how everyone interacts with Rebecca or everyone's dynamics with Rebecca, the one thing that I see very clearly is that Rebecca is not just a memory. She is a presence. Even after death, she still exists in everyone's hearts, right? Everyone sees her, everyone feels her, and everyone remembers her as the person that she was, or the person that everyone thought they knew, right? She had all these myriad of characters and all these myriad of personalities that actually attracted people to her, because she was the perfect masker, right? She had all these creations and all these different versions of herself that actually attracted everyone. She knew exactly what to say and exactly what to do and how to behave in order to make people love her, in order for people to become obsessed with her. She knows how to present herself in order to be admired. She uses her charm, her beauty, her social intelligence in order to gain control over people, right? She knows exactly what to do and what to say in order to gain friendships and to make her image even better than before, right? And this is how she operates, because that is how she gains control, how she deceives, but also how she manipulates, right? And through all these behaviors and all these charms, she manages to create a web, right? That is how she manipulates and abuses Maxim, how she gains control over Mrs. Danvers, but also how she manages to control everyone around Manderley. And what makes this so disturbing is the fact that this influence, this manipulation, doesn't just end when she dies. If anything, it becomes even stronger because once she passes away, Rebecca actually becomes an idea. She becomes something that people can remember, something that people can memorize, but also, most importantly, something that people can romanticize. And this is what makes Maxime and the new Mrs. De Winter the perfect victims, because not only they are incredibly entangled in Rebecca's web, but most importantly, they are the target of abuse. And no matter where they go, no matter who they are with, they will still find themselves being tortured by the memory of Rebecca. More specifically, if we look at both characters, both Maxime and the new Mrs. De Winter, we see how both of them not only are affected and haunted by the memory of Rebecca, but also we see how the fact that they are so entangled in Rebecca's web makes them become the victim, but also the perpetrator of their own abuse. So, for example, if we look at Maxime, right, he initially marries Rebecca because of the benefits she gives him, right? She is obviously of high society, so he is marrying his equal, but also at the same time she becomes the hostess, right? She becomes the memory and the life of Mandalay. He doesn't have to do anything in Mandalay because Rebecca is the one that handles it. She creates this image of Mandalay that everyone is so jealous of, but also desires to enjoy. But this is the same thing with the new Mrs. De Winter, right? Because she gets into Mandalay, or she moves to Mandalay already as a vulnerable person. We see how deeply insecure she is, but she also has a clear lack of self-confidence, but also most importantly, she has an unnerving desire to be loved, more specifically loved by Maxim, right? So this is how she falls onto Rebecca's web, because Rebecca is everything she has ever wanted to be, and she has what she truly desires most, which is Maxim's love, apparently, right? So this is how she becomes the victim, but also the perpetrator herself, right? Because she gets into Mandalay and immediately is constantly being compared with Rebecca, but also she compares herself to Rebecca as well. So she falls into the trap, or into Rebecca's trap, by saying, I have to be like her, or I will never be like her. So therefore, she is constantly manipulated and controlled by the image of Rebecca. And this becomes especially clear with characters like Mrs. Danvers, because she uses the memory of Rebecca in order to further control and further manipulate and torture, right? And this is how we know that Rebecca's web is not an isolated case, but actually more like a system. It's a structure where power, control, and manipulation actually are used on a daily basis in order to further torture people. And by the end of the novel, it becomes very clear that Rebecca's control was never passive, right? She not only wanted control during life, she actually wanted it after. And this is how we see that every action that she takes, and every way of manipulation, and every friend and connections that she made are delicately done in order to get one final act of control and one final act of revenge. And this is why I am of the belief that everything that happens right up to the end of the book is Rebecca's truly evil master plan, right? Because once we find out that Maxime never truly loved Rebecca and actually despised her, right? And the conversation that they have up until her death, actually what proves us is that Rebecca, the only one truly thing that she wanted was Mandalay itself. She wanted to own the estate. She wanted to be the rightful owner, right? But the one thing that she did not anticipate was the fact that Maxim will always say no. That is the one true hard line that he had. He was the owner of Mandalay, right? And this is not something that Rebecca truly agreed with, but also taking into account that she was deathly ill, there was nothing that she could lose, right? At the end of the day, she didn't have that much time to leave anyway, so therefore she could just go on a rampage and actually try to get the one thing that she truly wanted, which was Mandalay. And this is why right after Rebecca passes away, this is how the plan falls out, right? She knew perfectly well that Maxim would actually remarry quite soon, right? And also he would marry someone that is the complete opposite of Rebecca, which is someone who is quite insecure, not very confident, but most importantly, someone who is a people pleaser and someone who has no understanding of the social norms of high British society, right? So this is why she knew from the get-go that he would marry Mrs. De Winter, or someone like Mrs. De Winter at least, and also that Maxim would bring the new Mrs. De Winter to Mandalay in order to live there, because if there was something that Maxim loved over everything else, was Mandalay, same as Rebecca. I think Rebecca also knew that everyone that was on her side and all her friends and all her companions would constantly compare her to the new wife, and that this would affect the new Mrs. De Winter, right? As it actually happened. But most importantly, I think she was very aware that Jack Fable, her cousin, and also Mrs. Danvers would be very vengeful. And also, eventually, when they found out that she had been murdered, more specifically by Maxime, that they will actually try to find revenge. Most importantly, that Mrs. Danvers would actually become revengeful and would actually do anything and whatever it would take in order to make Maxime feel pain. And this is how Mrs. Danvers becomes the ultimate instrument of Rebecca's manipulation, right? Because everything she does, all the behaviors and all the abuse that she directs towards Mrs. De Winter is not rooted on conscious behaviors, but actually out of devotion of Rebecca's image, right? And this image is something that Rebecca, has cultivated herself out of the manipulation and out of the abuse that she committed towards Mrs. Danvers. So Mrs. Danvers has this idea that Rebecca is this great character. Obviously that she is deeply flawed, but she is the ultimate girl boss, right? But actually what Rebecca is, she is nothing more but a manipulative woman who just wanted to get her way with everything. And this is why Rebecca is such a terrifying character, not because of the actions that she does, but because of what she sets in motion, right? Even in her absence, she dictates behaviors, emotions, and even actions, right? So at the end of the day, it's not what is terrifying about her is not what she does, is what she makes people do, even when they think they are acting freely. At the end of the day, Rebecca is not just a story about love, jealousy, or memory. It is a story about control, about how someone's power can not just exist in actions, but also in perception. And this is why this book is so enduring even to this day, because it tells us something very real. And it's that manipulation sometimes is not loud and aggressive or obvious as we might imagine. Sometimes control and manipulation are quiet, strategic, subtle. We don't realize we're being manipulated or that we are in someone else's web until we are in the middle of it. And that is what makes Rebecca so unsettling, because the most dangerous forms of control are not the ones we can see, but the ones we believe in. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you like Rebecca if you have read it. And if you have, I would love to know your opinion about the book or about this video in general. So please make sure you put down in the comments what you thought of the book and the video, and let's discuss. Obviously, as always, let's be friendly. We're here to discuss the book. But yeah, I would love to know what you think of this book. And if you want more content about Rebecca or any of the books that I discuss in this channel, please make sure that you follow me on my other social media accounts. I post that every day and I post a lot more content there. But yeah, that's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you soon. Bye.